The Ocean Bluff Seaside Bar was usually quiet on midweek afternoons, but that day, the atmosphere seemed to grow heavy the moment Eli Mercer stepped through the door. He wasn't loud, he didn't draw attention. Just a 38-year-old man in a plain t-shirt, an old baseball cap, and eyes that held a solemn stillness, the kind of eyes only those who've stood between life and death truly have. Eli chose a secluded corner, sat down, and ordered a beer. He hadn't come to make a scene. He just wanted a moment of peace to gather the tangled pieces in his mind after nearly 16 years of service in the SEAL team. But for Ray Donnelly, the bar owner, it meant something else. At first glance, Ray had already placed a label on Eli, the quiet but dangerous military type. Though Eli hadn't said a word, hadn't so much as brushed against anyone, Ray marched over, his tone sharp, his eyes full of suspicion. Guys like you aren't welcome here. There was no shouting, no retaliation. Eli simply looked Ray in the eye not with anger, but with sorrow, as if he'd just been cast out of a place where he never thought he'd need to prove his worth. And then, just like that, he stood up and walked out, carrying with him the quiet dignity of a man who once stood on the front lines, now dismissed from the simplest battlefield of all ordinary life. His name was Eli Mercer, 38 years old, once one of the most elite soldiers in the United States Navy SEALs. 16 years may not sound like much to some, but in the military, each of those years held brutal missions, unnamed battles, and silent sacrifices witnessed only by the men who stood beside him. Eli never called himself a hero, and perhaps he never even considered the title. He simply did what needed to be done, just like every soldier who had ever stood on the front lines, in places where life and death were separated by a single breath. At 22, while his friends were off at college, dating, and writing the first chapters of their careers, Eli was jumping out of helicopters into unfamiliar territory, carrying a rifle on his back and a single unwavering belief in his heart to protect America with everything he had. Years of service and countless missions took a toll on his shoulders, his back, and eventually his nervous system. The injuries compounded until the doctors had no choice but to discharge him early. He no longer had the physical strength to carry out the mission. But the deepest wound wasn't visible. It wasn't the pain in his joints. It was the hollow ache of leaving behind the only life he'd ever known. His unit had been his family, his purpose, his world. Ocean Bluff was the place he chose to start over. A quiet coastal town where the sound of waves and the salty wind offered just enough calm to muffle the inner storms he carried. He rented a small room above a bait and tackle shop, lived simply, ate frugally, no friends, no family nearby, just an old soldier trying to reclaim a sense of normalcy. After spending too many years in the abnormal, Eli didn't need people to know who he had been. All he hoped for was that when he sat in a bar, quiet, with a beer in his hand and memories on his mind, he could be seen like anyone else. No more, but certainly not less. Not someone cast aside because of his appearance, not judged by surface level assumptions, without any understanding of the duty, the burden, and the truth that only those who serve can truly comprehend. Eli sat quietly in the corner of the bar, his eyes drifting toward the faded nautical charts hanging on the wall, as if searching for something distant, something that didn't quite belong to this place. The beer in front of him was barely touched. He spoke to no one but the server when placing his order. He didn't smile, nor did he scowl. Just silence. But that silence, to Ray Donnelly, owner of the Salty Dog Bar, was reason enough. Ray approached, voice shrill, footsteps heavy, as though carrying a storm cloud of prejudice with every step. You've been sitting here for 20 minutes, looking around like you're watching something. I don't like that quiet, brooding type in my bar. Eli looked up, his gaze steady, unshaken. I'm just drinking a beer, and thinking. Ray scoffed, leaning in close, his breath thick with cigarette smoke and contempt. I've seen your kind before. Old military types. Always acting like you're sizing people up, thinking you're better than the rest of us. Guys like you are nothing but trouble. Each word Ray spat landed like an invisible blow, not because of its force, but because it came from someone who had never known the cost of freedom that Eli had quietly paid. Still, Eli didn't react. He simply set his beer down slowly, deliberately, an emotion so calm it seemed to still the entire room for a brief moment. He knew full well he could teach Ray a lesson, if he wanted to. With his combat skills still intact, it wouldn't take 10 seconds to make both Ray and the bouncer bow their heads. But he also knew this was no battlefield. This was America, where a soldier like him wasn't meant to fight with fists anymore, but with dignity. So he chose to rise. No further words. No bitter styrus. Just one sentences oft enough that no one else could hear it, yet deep enough to carry the weight of everything he'd endured. I've sacrificed too much to still have to ask permission just to sit in peace. That night, Eli walked along the shore of Ocean Bluff, where the waves gently crashed against the rocks, as if trying to comfort souls still struggling to find peace. The ocean breeze slipped through his layers of clothing, cold and sharp, but nothing chilled him more than the feeling of being cast out from a world he had once sworn to protect with his entire youth. He wasn't angry, only hollow, as if the dignity of a soldier had been stripped away by nothing more than a glance loaded with prejudice. Back in his small rented room above the bait shop, Eli didn't turn on the light. He sat on the edge of his bed, pulled his phone from his jacket pocket, not to post something online, not to complain, and certainly not to go viral. He opened an old Apone his SEAL team had always used, a place where each message was meant only for those who had crawled through mud with him, shared bullets, and held breath through fire together. And he typed, Salty Dog Bar, Ocean Bluff, owner, Ray Donnelly, no reason. Kicked out a veteran, just letting the brothers know. Eli. That was it. No call to action. No request for help. No bitterness. Because Eli understood, true brotherhood never needed an invitation. It was built on blood, trust, and vows that never made it to the radio waves. After sending the message, he placed the phone down, leaned against the wall, and stared into the darkness, not expecting anything. For him, it was just a way to ease the tightness in his chest, a silent confession shared only with those he once called family. And what he didn't know, and perhaps didn't need to know, was that the message, fewer than 30 words, would stir a response deeper than any cry for help. And less than 24 hours later, 12 brothers would step out from the shadows, carrying a message that no one could ignore. No one disrespects a soldier, and walks away thinking no one's coming back. The following afternoon, Ocean Bluff was still and windless. Ray Donnelly, the owner of Salty Dog Bar, was fumbling with the front door lock, getting ready for the evening shift, when he heard something unusual across the street. 3 unmarked black vans pulled up with chilling precision. No one rushed. No one spoke. Every movement was practiced, silent and purposeful, like a ritual done hundreds of times before. The fan doors slid open. 12 men stepped out, one by one. No uniforms, no medals, just t-shirts, jeans, boots, and baseball caps. But there was one thing they couldn't hide: the unmistakable presence of those who had stared death in the face and walked through it. Ray froze. He didn't need introductions. Somewhere between instinct and fear, he knew they weren't there for drinks. Leading them was Chief Logan Reaper Kane, a towering man with eyes sharp as blades, yet his voice was calm, chillingly calm. Behind him, the others spread out casually, but sealed off the entrance to the bar. No one spoke. No explanation needed. Their presence alone was a louder message than any threat. Ray swallowed hard. Whatever arrogance and authority he had wielded the day before vanished like smoke in the sea wind. He stammered, forcing a weak smile. How can I help you, gentlemen? Reaper didn't answer immediately. He just stared at Ray, a gaze so deep it felt like it peeled away every mask Ray had ever worn. The bar fell completely silent. Even the same bouncer from the day before, now standing behind the counter, dared not breathe too loud. Finally, Reaper took a step forward. His voice was low, but it carried like a verdict. We heard a man named Eli Mercer, teammate, was thrown out of here last night. We're not here to start trouble. We're here to remind you, some men may have left the battlefield quietly, but they have never stopped being protected. No one raised a hand. No one raised a voice. But in that moment, Ray Donnelly understood something he'd never known. In all his years of running a bar, some things can be bought: honor, loyalty, and the respect owed to those who sacrifice so others could sell beer in peace. Inside Salty Dog, the air turned heavy, as if someone had locked away all sound. 12 men stood firm, not moving, not speaking threats, but their presence formed an unbreakable wall of principle. Ray stood face to face with Chief Logan Reaper Kane. His hands began to tremble at his sides. Reaper stared without blinking. His eyes didn't rage. They didn't threaten. They simply judged whether the man before him was worth forgiving. He didn't need to raise his voice. The weight of each word, delivered in stillness, was enough to chill the air. "You insulted a man who should have been welcomed like any citizen walking through that door," Reaper said slowly. Eli asked for no special treatment. All he wanted was a beer and peace. And instead of being treated like a human being, he was cast out because of how you saw his type. Ray fumbled, trying to form words. I didn't mean to hurt anyone. Maybe I was too harsh. I was wrong, truly wrong." Reaper didn't argue. He just nodded slightly. Owning your mistake is the first step. But to us, respect doesn't come from words, it comes from action. And he stepped forward again, his voice now like a final mission briefing. "You will call Eli. Apologize to him personally and honestly. Not to appease us, but to show that you understand how deeply you hurt him. And beyond that, you will publicly invite him back to this bar as an honored guest." Ray nodded, almost unable to resist. "And one more thing," Reaper added, his voice soft as the breeze but heavy enough to shake the heart. "You will make a significant donation to the Navy SEAL Foundation in Eli Mercer's name, not to erase your mistake, but to prove you've learned from it." Ray swallowed hard. How much is enough? Reaper didn't smile. He didn't name a price. He simply glanced toward Dr. Teen's medic, who would handle the details. Then he turned back and said quietly, "Enough to make a difference, enough to show you mean it." It wasn't a threat. It was a quiet sentence, inescapable, from men who understood better than anyone. Dignity cannot be demanded. It can only be returned through honor. An hour after the confrontation, the Salty Dog bar grew strangely quiet. None of the SEALs ordered drinks. They sat scattered across the tables, like ordinary patrons, but their presence cloaked the room like an invisible armor. Curious customers stepped in, only to turn right back around, sensing this was no place for noise today. In a small office behind the bar, Ray Donnelly was in a private conversation with Doc, the team's medic, with a calm face and a smile that rarely showed. They weren't discussing beer prices or nightly sales. They were talking about a number large enough to show remorse and how to rebuild the reputation of a place marred by arrogance and prejudice. Then the office door creaked open. Ray stepped out, his face pale, but this time his eyes no longer dodged the truth. In front of the entire bar, he lifted the phone and dialed a number, Eli Mercer's. When the call connected, his voice trembled. "Eli, this is Ray Donnelly. I owe you an apology. Not just for throwing you out of the bar, but for judging a man I knew nothing about based only on how he looked. I was wrong. I was disrespectful. And I'd like to invite you back anytime as an honored guest." On the other end, Eli didn't say much. Just one calm reply. "I'll come. And I hope this time is just to sit in peace, like anyone else." 1 week later, Eli Mercer returned to Salty Dog, not expecting anything, but hoping that sometimes the right thing can still follow a bitter mistake. His steps across the old wooden floor were slow, but no longer burdened by rejection. No suspicious stares. More importantly, no silent denial of a man who had given his youth for his country. Ray Donnelly stepped out from behind the bar. His usual swagger was gone. He walked toward Eli, not forced, not masked, only a man with eyes that finally understood how to bow. "I was wrong, Eli. Wrong to judge you by your appearance. Wrong for forgetting that a soldier doesn't have to prove he deserves respect. I'm sorry, not just for what I said, but for making you leave this place like you didn't belong." Eli gave a small nod. He didn't need the apology to forgive. It was how a man made things right that convinced him to stay. From that day on, Salty Dog changed. A small sign was hung near the entrance. Veterans welcome here, not just in words, but in heart. They hosted live music nights to raise funds for the Navy SEAL Foundation. A wall corner was dedicated to photos of local veterans, framed with gratitude and respect. And most notably, Ray made the largest donation ever recorded from a small business in the city in Eli Mercer's name. Word spread quickly through Ocean Bluff. Salty Dog is now the most veteran-friendly bar in town. No marketing needed. No empty slogans. Just one mistake. And one act of redemption big enough to turn that mistake into a beginning. Eli sat down at his old table. No one looked at him like a stranger. His beer was poured full, this time by the very man who once threw him out. And as the afternoon sunlight filtered through the window, casting its glow across the carved wooden sign on the wall, Eli smiled gently. Some battles don't need bullets. Some teams never make it to television screens, but they'll always show up for a brother, even if all he does is send a quiet message. Eli Mercer's story wasn't just about a bar or an apology. It was a reminder that respect shouldn't come only after someone's been hurt. Salty Dog didn't change because it had to, but because it woke up. And in a busy world, sometimes it's moments like these, silent yet full of courage, that reminds us humanity isn't lost and brotherhood never ceased. Never judge a person by their silence, because some have screamed through war zones, so you could sit quietly in a cafe, and some hearts once carried an entire nation. Now they only ask to be treated like any other. Share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever witnessed or experienced a moment that restored your faith and kindness? Tap like if you believe in second chances. Subscribe and turn on notifications to hear more true stories, real life lessons that move hearts and restore hope.